Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my Week 3 LCK review, analysis, and at the end, my updated power rankings. It has been a very interesting week in the LCK. Some upsets, some teams maybe coming back into form, some teams falling out of form. Just some really interesting going-ons overall. So I'm excited to get into it. If you guys are excited, please go ahead, leave a like, leave that down in the comment section. You know I love when I hear from y'all, so go ahead and let me know down there. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into our first series of the week, our first series of day one here. We had Gen.G taking on the Kwangdong Freecs in a battle of two teams that I think a lot of people expected to be closer, but clearly there is something wrong here. It's a very easy 2-0 win here for Gen.G. A top team very much facing a not top team right now. Gen.G just looks really good, like top to bottom. You can't really find a huge weakness on this team right now, which I think is a really good sign for Gen.G when it comes to actively competing globally. Usually teams like that don't want to have a giant weakness, and they also want to have giant strengths. And that's exactly what this team has. Chovy is going to be my player of the series here. He was phenomenal. His Azir game in game 1, absolutely great. His LeBlanc game in game 2, absolutely great. This was a huge mid-gap series overall. You can say that Fate maybe could have been the dud of the series, and I think in a lot of cases he was, but for me, it goes to somebody else just because of some crazy plays that may have happened. But this realistically very much could be the active current best mid-jungle duo in the world. Showmaker and Canyon are obviously great, but Showmaker's actually had a little bit of a slow start to the year. Canyon's played really well, I think, to start 2022, but I would say Showmaker's been a little bit slower than Chovy has out of the gate, and both Peanut and Chovy are firing on all cylinders. They have been phenomenal, so this team definitely excels there. They have maybe the best AD carry in Korea. In Ruler, Lehens has really been phenomenal, and Doran has been really solid in the top lane as well. This Gen.G team really doesn't have a weakness. All of them played really well in this series as well. But then you move over to Kwangdong, and it's like, man, this team's not good at all, are they? This series was really just Keen trying his best to win. It felt very similar to Africa last year, if we're being honest. It's just Keen trying his absolute best to carry a team that has no idea how to play League of Legends into a spot where they might be able to make playoffs, but in this situation, I don't think that's working out too well for him, because the rest of this team inted really hard. My dud of the series is going to go to Elam again in the jungle. He has had an atrocious start to the year. You could really argue that Elam has been the worst player in the LCK so far. I think that's a very real argument to make, and that continued in this series. He was incredibly out-jungled by Peanut, but not even out-jungled. He out-jungled himself. I remember in game 1, he makes this, I think it was game 1, he clears blue side and then goes to invade and just gets completely obliterated for it. For no reason. He has no prio anywhere, just does it to do it, almost. Like, you see that in solo queue, and you flame the shit out of your jungler in solo queue because it happens. And then you now see, like, when a pro does it, you're like, this, how do you think you can get away with this? So, yeah, he just made some really bad plays. Some plays that don't make any sense, if we're being honest. And he absolutely earns dud of the series. Like I said earlier, this very much could have gone to Fate. Elam and Fate either do not click at all, or they're both bad. I can't tell which one's which. I'm actually kind of leaning towards the latter right now. Elam, at least, is really terrible. Fate has been gapped in pretty much every matchup he has played the entire year. This has easily been the worst jungle mid-duo in the LCK, at least in 2022 so far. And Hoyt has also been a huge hindrance for this team. I mean, for Christ's sake, Tryndamere... Fate on Tryndamere in game 2 was out-damaged by Lehens on Janna. So, if that tells you anything, Tryndamere being out-damaged by Janna is not a good sign for you actively being anything in that game at all. So, yeah, not a good start to the year for Fate. Not a good start to the year for KDF. They have been really bad, and it's kind of sad to see, because this team, you know, theoretically should have the talent to be decent in the LCK, but they just... You know, Keen tries, but even Keen has bad games. Teddy is just so, like, Jin Air Teddy again, of... Sometimes he'll pop off at, like, 40 minutes. You know, his teamfight mechanics are still fine, but his laning is just weak, and that's not nearly as strong... It's not nearly as viable, I should say, as it was, you know, in 2019, 2018. So, you know, he's struggling. Plus, he has maybe the worst support in the LCK in Hoyt right now. Your mid jungle might be the worst in the LCK. This team is just bad. There is really nothing about it. But for Gen.G, it's a good win. It's a necessary win. You got to beat up on the lower teams to do it, and they did it in pretty commanding fashion here. Moving on here to Series 2 of Day 1, we had DRX taking on Fredit BRION in a nice 2-0 win here for DRX. They picked up their first series win, at least, of the series. I believe, actually, their first 2 wins of the year in their last series last week. And then they come here and pick up 2 more against Fredit BRION. They seem to have gotten something under control. Scrim's DRX seems to have come out at least a little bit here in the last couple weeks because they looked really good here. Deft is going to be my player of the series. He was phenomenal in both games on the Aphelios, especially that game 2. He really took over, was outputting a ridiculous amount of damage by the end of the game. Really not much that BRION could do by the time that Deft got super duper online, but everybody on this DRX team honestly deserves a little bit of credit for having a good series. I want to give a shout out to the solo laners. Kingin absolutely brutalized Morgan in the top lane, which is... it's something you may have expected going into the year, but as things have played out, honestly, Morgan has been much better than Kingin so far this year. So, to see Kingin kind of get his confidence back a little bit, especially on that Jace in Game 2, absolutely destroying Morgan on the Gwen, it's a really good sight to see. And then Zika actually had probably his best series of the year as well. He had a good Victor game in Game 1. It's a pretty easy matchup going into the Rise. Pretty typically, the Rise isn't a pick I like too much, but Lava's a good player, and for Zika to be able to beat him consistently, I think was a good sign. Pioshik's still struggling a little bit, but honestly, he was fine. I thought his Lee Sin game in Game 2 was much, much better. Probably one of the best games we've seen out of him all year. So DRX looking really, really good just in general. And then Beryl. I didn't even mention Beryl. Beryl played really well in both games, keeping Deft safe. The PL in that game was actually nuts. So, honestly, DRX just playing really well in general in this series. And against a team in Fredit BRION that I think is probably better than their record would suggest, but BRION not so much in this one. It seems like this is a team that probably plays a lot closer to their opponent's level, which is exactly what they were last year as well, in all of last year, both spring and summer. This is a team that would randomly take a series off of DAMWON and then drop a series to, you know, whatever the other bottom team was for that split, you know, DRX in the summer, or whoever you want to mention, right? It would randomly just, you know, play bad against bad teams and play good against good teams. It's kind of looking similar here. Morgan's going to be my dud of the series. He absolutely deserved it. He got clapped in the top lane by Kingin. Just was a huge, huge gap in that lane. There was a big bot gap as well, and you very much could have given this to Delight. I think Delight, especially on the Thresh in Game 2, probably earned it. But Morgan also got gapped pretty hard, and I think it was a little bit more obvious in Morgan's case, so he's going to get my dud of the series. Nobody on this team played particularly well. I thought didn't play bad, but he didn't have any sort of jungle control. Not necessarily his fault. All of his lanes lost, but... you know, it's a little unfortunate to be in that situation. He's had a pretty good start to the year, so kind of rough to be in that situation. The spot lane's always been the weakness for Bro. Henna and Delight have been the weakness so far this year as well. They were just outclassed by Deft and Beryl, who have been the strong point of DRX even in their losses this year, so I guess we could have seen this coming. Just a not great series here from Fredit BRION. Maybe they're not quite in that level that we thought they were, but remember, I still have this team power ranked 9th for a reason. I think this is a team that can be competitive against a lot of teams, but isn't really a team that feels like they're that close to winning a lot of these series. So, yeah, you know, they're fine. I think they're competitive, but maybe not good. Morgan had a horrendous series. This is much, much closer to 2021 Morgan than it was to how he started off 2022. This was really, really bad from him. And then on DRX's side, it looks like I'm really happy to see this team get their confidence back. We saw the Pioshik post-game celebrations. So that's good. It's good to see this team feel confident again, because I think that's a big part of winning in League of Legends, honestly, just in general, is trusting yourself to be able to make the right plays at the right times. And, you know, if DRX can kind of get that confidence back, if Pioshik especially can get that confidence back, he's such a huge part of why this team feels like they can contend for a higher spot, because we know Deft and Beryl are going to be a really good bot lane. Zika, as, you know, one of those players who, at least in the LPL, was always really good because he paired up so well with his jungler and created so many macro plays. Think of him very similar. If you're not familiar with Eastern League of Legends, think of him very similar to like a Niski. He plays very much like that. He creates so much for his jungler and he helps facilitate that role so much. If Pioshik can really get going and get rolling this year, I think DRX can be one of the top teams in the LCK, like like I projected them to be going into the year. So, and then Kingin certainly was not a weakness in the series, and that's really all they need him to be. So, yeah, very good series from DRX, not so much from Fredit BRION. All right, jumping in here to day 2. The first series of day 2 was KT Rolster taking on Liiv SANDBOX in a little bit of an upset here. A 2-1 series win for SANDBOX that I don't think a lot of people saw coming. KT's kind of been on fire to start the year, and they definitely got put out in this one. Their weaknesses are definitely starting to show. Their weaknesses are becoming clear, is what I should say. KT wins the first game here. It's a pretty solid first game, mostly on the back of aiming, just taking literally everything on the map. It was insane. I don't usually call out draft diff, but again, sometimes you have to. Picking fasting Senna into a Caitlyn isn't necessarily the game plan I would have went for, because Caitlyn just got absolutely everything on the map all game long. I think she did something ludicrous, like 13k damage to turrets at like 10 minutes or something. 15 minutes maybe. It was disgusting. It was absolutely disgusting. She took every objective on the map, and then KT just kind of spiraled out of control. Aiming looked really good in that game. Game 2, KT really should have won, and then they threw it at Baron. Both teams kind of threw at Baron at different points, but KT really should have won this game. Ice played really well in Game 2 here on the Aphelios. The announcers were really hyping up Closer's Corki. I thought Ice was way more influential in this game on the Aphelios. His damage was absolutely nuts. His positioning is really good. He's much better than Envy was. Just in general, I think this is definitely a good substitution here for SANDBOX, because he is definitely an upgrade to what they were getting out of Envy. And then in Game 3, Liiv, again, was down a little bit. KT's still throwing the game, as they typically do. But really, all the gold was on Rascal in the top lane, which is kind of something we've been saying on KT for a lot, but I mean, when he gets his Lee Sin, he wins. I mean, we'll talk about it later in the week as well, but I think at some point you're going to have to start banning Lee Sin, like, consistently against KT, because I don't know if you can allow Rascal to keep playing this champion. He's just simply too good at it, but unfortunately in this series it was not enough to carry the dead weight that was jungle mid. But in Game 3, Closer looking really good on Aurelia. This is a pick we know Closer loves to play. It's probably his favorite pick, and we got to see him on it here. He looked really, really good on it. The Aurelia can take over games, and absolutely did in Game 3. So, takeaways from the series in general. For Liiv, some of your more underperforming members, I think, performed really well in the series. Specifically Closer, who's had a really rough start to the year. I know a lot of people were really hyped on Closer going into the year, me kind of included. I thought he would be a mid-table, mid laner. But, he's had a really rough start to the year. He's been a real big hindrance for this team for a lot of the start of the year. And, he played really well in this series, especially the Corki and Aurelia games in games 2 and 3 were definitely some of his best games of the year so far. And then Ice. Ice is actually going to be my player of the series here. He was phenomenal in game 2 on the Aphelios, and his game 3 on the Ezreal, he was outputting a lot of damage as well. He looked good. This is the kind of series you want to see out of a young bot laner that is actually just getting a shot, because they don't really have anybody at the position. If you can get Ice to kind of play at like a decent level like this all year long, Liiv is probably better than like bottom 3 or bottom 2 or wherever you want to put them after last week. This is a really big win over a team that's pretty good. On the side of KT, man, they have some really good players and they have some really bad players. I don't know what happened to the T1 junglers after they left T1, but we talked about it earlier in the week with Elam has completely fallen off the map, and Cuz now, I mean, golly, Cuz is right up there with them, because he looked awful in the series. He's clearly my dud of the series here again. Not a good start to the year for Cuz. 2 games of Poppy, which is a pick I really like, and then a game of Rek'Sai that I think a lot of people are, at least I saw a lot of people on Twitter, really upset by. I think Rek'Sai is perfectly acceptable in the meta right now. I think it's a kind of an underrated pick, at least in terms of how often it's picked, but I have a much bigger problem with the bot lane here. You're picking Lucian Nami into Ezreal Leona, and you're just kind of hoping and praying that you dominate the laning phase, and you didn't. Again, I've been very vocal on this channel about how Lucian Nami is not good right now. I think it's one game in 12 appearances so far in pro play. It's been absurdly bad, and it never looks good. This is a pick that I think it's just a trap, right? It's a complete trap, and I think they fell into it in this one. Arya also having a really poor series. That LeBlanc game in game 2, he was invisible. I mean, completely invisible. And you could kind of say that for his whole season so far. Arya really hasn't made any sort of mistakes. Not to the level of Cuz, like making like really bad plays, but he hasn't done anything. I got a lot of flack in my power rankings video for ranking Arya so low in the mid lane power rankings, because I just didn't see it in the LJL. I thought he was really good in his, like, league of play. But when he went to Worlds, I always thought he was, you know, fine, but not necessarily someone who was making a ton of big plays, even in the play-in stage. He is not. He's exactly that. He's somebody who is consistently below average. He's not going to make terrible plays, but he's also not really going to do anything. The TF pick in Game 3, it's a pick that you really need to dominate on the meta right now. It's really strong, and he did nothing. He did absolutely nothing on it. So, it just, I don't know. The mid-jungle here is definitely a question mark. Not as much as the Freecs, but, you know, KT still has a lot to figure out here when it comes to their biggest weaknesses. Rascal is not that biggest weakness. He was really bad in Game 2. The Cannon ults were not his thing, so he gets his pick in Game 3, gets the Lee Sin, and he dominates. He solo kills over and over and over and over, and he gets enough gold to actually keep KT in that game for a long period of time, but, you know, it's just hard to solo carry on a Lee Sin. But I think at some point you're going to have to ban Lee Sin against Rascal. I think we're at that point where that's got to be a perma-ban against KT at this point, because if you give him Lee Sin, he's going to win lane, and he's going to try his best to hard carry that game. He's just too good at that champion. You can't allow him to have it. But overall, KT looking not so good in this one. The players who had been looking good didn't look terrible. Rascal and Liiv, I think, have definitely been the two bright spots of KT to start the year. And they looked fine in this series, nothing too atrociously bad. Aiming also had a good series, especially in Game 1. And then for SANDBOX, the more questionable members were actually the ones to kind of carry you here. Closer and Ice having a really good series. Dove and Krako have kind of been the two best performing members going into this series, but Dove had a rough Game 3 going into Rascal's Lee Sin, and Krako didn't have a ton of map impact in general, although he did out-jungle Cuz, that is definitely for sure. So it's good to see the young guys step up in Closer and Ice and got to get some of the ball rolling there, but not the end of the world for KT. I think you just have to make a couple of small changes, and you probably win this series. Moving on to the second series here of Day 2, we had T1 taking on NS RedForce in a very, very fun 3-game set that T1 edges out here. I should say it was fun in Games 2 and 3. Game 1 was a little bit boring and a little bit, how should I say, anticlimactic at the end. It was climactic, just kind of gross. So we'll go game by game at first. Game 1, NS was in control. They're going for Baron. They should have it locked up. Faker Corky poke is ridiculous. Gets Nongshim and the Baron so ridiculously low. Owner comes in on Viego and steals the Baron. T1 just kind of snowball from there. They end up winning the game with 5 kills. Love that for them. Faker on Corky does so much poke that they can't even fight. Nongshim essentially, T1 wins the game with 5 kills because Nongshim just chooses not to die. They choose to lose the game rather than die. So, going into Game 2, a much better game here from Nongshim. Kind of carried off the back of Kana in the top lane on Akali, who just really took over. Got super far ahead. Dread on the Lee Sin did a good job of getting the Akali ahead and then maintaining map pressure. So those two played kind of well in Game 2. And then Game 3 was pretty back and forth, I'd say, for the most part. But Faker's Azir is just too good. Keria on Thresh is a magnet, honestly. Zeus on Jace just does so much damage. It was really difficult for Nongshim to do anything. Owner does a great job of peeling in that team fight as well. But a good series win here from T1. Honestly, pretty standard overall from T1. But I am a little bit worried about a few things on this team and really excited about Nongshim for a few things. So I know that might be backwards with how this series went. But honestly, this series brought me a lot of confidence in Nongshim. We'll start with T1 because they won. Faker is really good. That's really all there is to say. His Corky and Azir games were unbelievably good. He was easily the best player on the Rift in this entire series. And there's a lot of really good players on the Rift in this series. So, a really good series. He's the player of the series, I guess you could say. Some negative takeaways maybe. Gumayushi was kind of questionable in the first 2 games. Especially in Game 2. His Jinx game in Game 2 was not super good. Definitely got outplayed by Ghost in Game 2 for sure. But he made up for it in Game 3, so it should be fine. Owner with a big steal in Game 1, and then some really, really good team fight against Xin Zhao in Game 3. That champion's usually not known for being super effective in team fights, but if you get off a really good ultimate, you can get up some good knockups. Your peel as Xin Zhao is ridiculously important. If you have something like an Azir and a Jinx, a team comp that basically, if you just give them enough time, they'll win you the fight for, by themselves. So, Owner did a really good job in that Game 3. And then Zeus had, like I said, a very questionable Game 2. Decently fine Game 1, but a really good Game 3 there on the Jace, so. And then Keria, I thought was good all series long. Keria is just a good player. For Nongshim, they showed good things and they showed bad things. I think being able to keep up with T1 at this pace is really solid. Kana especially had a really good series. He's kind of been, I don't want to say the weak point of this team so far, because that's probably been BDD, ironically enough. But he had, he hasn't necessarily been the same guy he was in T1 last year. He looked really good in this series, especially his game 2 on Akali. When he gets those more aggressive picks, he looks really, really strong on them. I really like Kana in that kind of meta, and I think we saw that. Dread is my dud of the series here, but he was kind of the player of the game in game 2. He just was so bad in game 3 that it's kind of hard for me to, like, balance that out. He was the big reason why they lost the series in game 3, but let's not forget, he's probably the reason that they won game 2 in general, so, you take some, you leave some. Yeah, Dread, unfortunately, he has these games. This is what we know of Dread. He's been pretty consistent to start the year so far, but we know that some of these games he's going to be really good. Some of these games he's going to be really, really bad. And unfortunately, that's just kind of the Dread experience. But at least you're still getting the good out of him. And for the most part this year, it's been good. And then, let's talk about Peter. Peter is really freaking good on Hook Champions and Yuumi, I guess. Yuumi is a pick that we've seen him play, I think, more than any other pick so far this year. They've won almost every single game that he's picked it. I don't know if that has more to say about Yuumi as a champion or if Peter's playstyle just falls into that, but he's really good on Hook Champions as well. His Blitzcrank game in Game 3, he was hitting a ton. I know that hitbox is kind of questionable sometimes, but he was hitting a ton of really good hooks, and even in the Thresh in Game 1, I think Peter is a really good player and a definite upgrade to effort. He's looking like a top half support in the LCK right now, and I think that's a great find for Nongshim. But, this jungle mid duo has, I'm not going to say they have to get it online, because Dread is online sometimes, but I feel like BDD has been relatively invisible for this year so far. Kind of similar to how I was talking about Arya, but he's been much better than Arya. But just in general, you want more out of BDD. He's kind of been the weak point of this Nongshim team to kick off the year. And I don't expect him to be that for the rest of the year. It's just a little unfortunate to see him getting off to a little bit of a slower start at the start of the season, but hopefully he can pick that up. Hopefully Dread can not have these terrible games too often, and, Ghost is Ghost. He neutralized Gumayushi in games 1 and 2. It's all you ever needed from him, so, yeah, decent series here from Nongshim. They look like they can compete on a level with T1, who most people are considering unanimously one of the top 2 teams in the LCK right now, a world's favorite. So, if Nongshim is on that level, it's really, really exciting to be a fan of them, if you are one. So, and then T1, like I said, easily one of the top 2 teams in the LCK, potentially one of the top 3 to 4 teams in the world. A very, very good team. They just show consistency. If Faker can play like this all year long, if Owner can play like this, if Keria and Gumayushi can continue to grow, this team is going to be a world's favorite. And that's really, really good because, they're still young and they still have a chance to even get better. And if they can get better, they might just be the best team in the world. Jumping into Day 3, our first series of Day 3 here was Hanwha Life taking on DAMWON KIA in a 2-0 series win for DK against a bottom-tier team that they should be beating up. First takeaway here, I'm not going to go game by game because both the games were really similar. They were both just very clean DAMWON wins. Neither were really ever in Hanwha's control, and so it's not really worth going game by game here. Positives for DAMWON, Bertle is in, and Bertle looks comfortable. They were splitting time. Hoya was kind of the guy at the beginning of the year. They started splitting time a little bit. Bertle looks to be in full time now for DAMWON, and he is a huge improvement to Hoya. We all knew he would be. I'm sure they just wanted to make sure that he was, ready before, throwing him into a side that wants to win the World Championship. But, Bertle looked really, really good in this series. He was very close to being my player of the series. He absolutely gapped Dudu. And yes, Dudu's like a bottom tier top laner in the LCK, but it is still really good to see him play super well, especially on that Gwen in Game 1. He had a good Akali game in Game 2 as well. Just, Bertle looking decent, I think, in the series overall. Still making some mistakes, but that's just the kind of player Bertle is. He's really, really aggressive, going to overcommit and make some mistakes sometimes, but will usually be worth it. Really, the big 2 people to talk about for DAMWON, I know I talked about this earlier. Canyon and Showmaker really stepped up. What a surprise. The 2 people that are carrying DAMWON are Canyon and Showmaker. I talked about Showmaker getting up to a little bit of a slow start at the beginning of the year. This was not a slow series from Showmaker. He was phenomenal, especially in that Game 2 on the LeBlanc. He looked really, really dominant. And then Canyon. Canyon just took over the entire map. Canyon's going to be my player of the series here. He was really freaking good. That Lee Sin game in Game 2 was disgusting. Canyon's just great. Showmaker's great. I mean, really, how much is there to say about that? On the side of Hanwha, not the best showing in the world. They just looked really passive. Their macro is a problem, for sure. I don't know who their shot caller is, whether it's on Fleek, whether it's Vista, whether it's SAMD. It's probably one of those three, I would guess, but, you know, whoever it ends up being, they have to figure something out because it's not working right now. On Fleek got mega gapped in the jungle. SAMD and Vista got gapped in the bot lane, and Dectum and Kellen didn't even have that great of a series. Karis got gapped, but who really cares? You know, you get gapped by Showmaker, it happens. And then Dudu got hard gapped by Bertle. Dudu's actually going to be my dud of the series here. He looked really bad in that top lane matchup. Yes, he is one of, like, the bottom LCK top laners, but he looked like it in the series. He did not look good at all. And then when this team got really far behind, they essentially just sat back and waited to lose. I'm not a fan of this approach at all. Like, just giving up objective after objective after objective. At some point, you have to pull the trigger and try and take a fight. And Hanwha just didn't want to do that. And that's frustrating to watch, but, you know, I get it. You're down a lot. You don't think you can win any of the fights, so you just play passive. But eventually, you're going to be... If you continue to play passive, when you're down 2k, you're eventually going to be down 5k, and then you definitely can't fight. And that's essentially what happened in this series. So, not great from Hanwha, but a really clean series from DAMWON. Exactly what you wanted to see. Bertle playing well is exactly what you wanted to see. Canyon and Showmaker linking up to really take over a series is exactly what you wanted to see. Just everything you could want and more from a DAMWON series to kind of get their mental back on track after what was I don't want to say a shaky start to the year, but maybe not the start to the year that everyone expected. Jumping into Series 2 here of Day 3, we had Fredit BRION taking on the Kwangdong Freecs in a 2-0 kind of gross series win here for Fredit BRION. Oh boy, man, if you're a KDF fan, I feel for you. You have to be on medication at this point because it cannot be easy. It absolutely cannot be easy remotely being a KDF fan right now. Let's talk about Game 1. So let me lay out the facts of Game 1. One team has 4 dragons, Soul, Baron, Elder. Do you think they won that game? Because they didn't. They lost that one. KDF lost with all of those things. Somehow, I can't even imagine. Sword did really well in late game team fights on Gwen. I don't want to take that away from him, but they lost that game. Then you go into Game 2. They have like KDF has like 1 kill at 20 minutes with Lee Sin, LeBlanc. Graves is up like 150 CS in the top lane. And they lose that game. I can't verbalize how this series made me feel. Because, you know, I want to first note, props to Fredit BRION for sticking in it and playing the games out and being able to come back and win these. But I feel like the series is so much more about KDF than it is about Fredit BRION. Because you have so much, and yet you can't do anything with it. The macro on this team is just so bad. This feels like solo queue. But even in solo queue, if you're up like 8k gold, you win the game. not in pro, I guess. Keen is trying his absolute best. He is dominating lane phase. Like I said, Graves into Gragas, he was up like 150 CS. He Flame Horizoned and then some Sword in Game 2. And I don't think he got a single, like, piece of attention at all. The entire series was given no resources. LM just power farmed on Lee Sin when he had a Graves that had a billion CS and a LeBlanc into a Corki. He power farmed the entire game. Fate did nothing on the LeBlanc. It's not like I'm praising Fate. Fate did nothing on the LeBlanc. It's disgusting. Props to Fredit BRION for winning this series. Lava's my player of the series here. He played really well in Game 2 on the Corki in those late game team fights. But, you know, what are you going to do? I mean, KDF kept the door open and good on BRION for being able to kick the door down. You know, if they're going to leave the door open, then take advantage of it. And that's exactly what BRION did. Even being down a ton of gold, they never gave up. They played like a team. They played coordinated. They played together. And they won team fights, even being down gold. It's really, really good for Fredit BRION. This team plays really well as a team, and I think that's a big reason why they're getting a ton of wins here. Not a ton of wins, but a ton of like competitive games here at the beginning of the split. It's just because their teamwork is pretty off the charts. The opposite is going to be said for Kwangdong. You have to figure something out here because this is not working. Whatever the problem is, fix it. The problem right now is Elm. Elm is my dud of the series again. He just does nothing. He is irrelevant. He doesn't exist on the map. What does he do? You have to. I mean, at this point, I'm considering replacing jungle mid. I know you have to have a challengers team. You have to have another jungle mid. I mean, because at this point, these two cannot play at the LCK level. That is what I'm saying. At least Elm. Elm is not an LCK caliber jungler right now. It's not even the fact that he's just having a bad start to the split. The way he is playing right now is like, you have to bench him. You cannot win games with him on the Rift. Right now, the way he is playing. You know, and that's not to be... I hate being hard flamey, but like, it is what it is. He's been the worst player in the world so far this year. He has been atrociously bad. Fate has not been much better. Hoyt has also been really bad, although not nearly as bad this week as he has been in series past, but still not a good week for Kwangdong. You know, this is an 0-2 week against two teams that you should beat. So, yeah, just, I don't know. Not a good week for KDF. You got to figure it out. You got to do something with Ellen. Poor Keen. You can just see how tilted he is at this point, and I would be too. If I'm up 150 CS, I don't get a single piece of jungle attention, and then we lose the game, even with Soul and Baron. Yeah, I'd be tilted as well. So, yeah, Kwangdong is not in a good spot right now. They have to figure it out, but good win for Brion. You know, I don't want to take away from them. Sword, oh, by the way, Sword is in for Morgan in this series, and he's much better than Morgan. Yeah, he got absolutely clapped by Keen in lane, but who doesn't get clapped by Keen in lane, just generally speaking? And then he was much better in team fights. He was actually really good in game 1 on the Gwen, even if he was down a little bit in lane. His game 1 was really good, so I expect to see Sword in a lot more often now for Morgan. Morgan had a really rough week, and I think Sword looked a lot better, so I would expect him to stay. But, you know, a good week for Brion, or a series here from Brion. Just generally, you know, if they're going to leave the door open, it is still up to you to actually take advantage of that, and Brion did. So, good for them, but really this series is just about KDF collapsing historically. Moving on to day 4 here. Kicking off day 4, we had Gen.G taking on KT Rolster in a kind of shock 2-0 series win here for KT. Just your typical KT week, losing 1-2 to a team in the bottom 2-3 of the power ranking standings, and then beating the undefeated Gen.G 2-0. What a series here from KT. This is the problem that you face when playing KT, is it's really hard to deal with them in draft. And that's exactly what happened, I think, in this series. KT picks these weird picks, but they're so comfortable on them that they can win really, really consistently on it. Game 1, Liif's set is unstoppable. He might be the best set support in the world ever. I mean, it's unstoppable. He is perfect on that champion. He was very close to being my player of the series. In fact, it's almost a crime that he's not, because he played really well in game 2 as well, but somebody else played really well in that same vein. Just, holy crap, did Liif... I mean, Liif's game 1 was nuts. And then game 2, Rascal, you cannot... I said this earlier in the week. You cannot... You cannot give Rascal Lee Sin. You are not allowed to give him Lee Sin, and you gave him Lee Sin. He has like 19 solo kills. It's week 3, and he has like 19 solo kills. He has been so good this year. I got a comment a little while ago, I believe last week, that was asking me who the best players in each position in the world are. I truly believe that Rascal might be the best top laner in the world right now. I don't think there is a world-class top laner, but you want to ask which top laners played the best in 2022? It has to be Rascal. I don't know if it could be anybody other than Rascal. He has dominated everybody that he has played this year. He played Lee Sin into Tryndamere and obliterated him, which is not something that should happen. Cuz had his best series of the year by far. That Poppy game in game 2 was really important. And then I love KT pulling out the Kalista Jarvan bot lane here. It's not something Gen.G was prepared to play into, clearly, and they played really well on it. I don't think traditionally you're going to be picking that very often. It's not like it's strong in the meta or anything, but, you know, I think these two are just so good at that pick. Liif especially is just so good on these, like, super hard engaged, like, non-support supports, like Set, like Jarvan, that he just dominated this series. You want to give player of the series to Liif? I totally understand. I'm going to give it to Rascal. It really belongs to both of them. Both the former Gen.G players absolutely tearing apart Gen.G this series, I should say. But for Gen.G, they had a lot of problems. Chovy's my dud of the series because I don't think he did anything. This was kind of a reversal of fortunes. Arya kind of the person who hasn't been doing too much for KT so far this year at all. That was really Chovy in this series. He was farming. He was up a ton of farm, but he didn't do anything. And, that's kind of the bad part of Chovy, quote unquote, that we've had, since he joined the league is he's going to be super far up in farm because he's really focused on it, but sometimes he can be a little avoidant of actual plays, and that kind of came out in this series. Not a good series from Chovy. Not a good series from Doran. Doran got huge gapped by Rascal. Doran had a good week last week, and some people were saying that, well, maybe Gen.G didn't actually lose the top lane deal. Well, Rascal obliterated Doran in the series, and then not a good series from Lehens. Ruler I thought played fine, but Lehens did not. He got absolutely gapped by Liiv, who is, the guy he's replacing. So not, I also got a lot of flack in my power rankings. I'm not here to brag. I typically don't brag, but when I get a lot of flack for something, I tend to go for it. I got a lot of flack for putting Liiv above Lehens in my power rankings. Liiv hard gapped Lehens in this series by a lot. So, and then, like I said, Chovy didn't play well. Peanut, I thought was fine. Not necessarily good, but, he was fine. And then Ruler, I thought was easily the best player on Gen.G. What else is new? That's kind of, he's always going to be good. Ruler doesn't really have bad series. To me, that's why he's the best AD carry in the LCK, so. But overall, great series here from KT. You want to see more from Gen.G, but it's just their first loss of the year. You're not going to panic too much yet. But, man, when this KT team works, when they're playing their best League of Legends, they can beat anybody in the world. I truly believe that. And they showed that in this series. Jumping into the second series here of Day 4, we had NS RedForce taking on DRX, a battle of two teams that I thought would have been similar in the power rankings to start the year. Definitely haven't started like that, but man, they kind of were in this one. 2-0 series win here for DRX. The coach firing diff is real. I guess Coach Kim was the problem? Question mark, question mark? Obviously, it's not that simple. A really good series here from DRX. It is incredibly, incredibly good to see them get their confidence back. A really good 2-0 week here for them. They looked really good in this series, honestly, overall. I thought everybody on the team looked good. I think Deft obviously is your player of the series. 2 games of Jinx here. That Jinx win rate is going, yup. And that is good for DRX because Deft, when he's on, is still one of the best AD carries in the world. And that's what we saw in this series. He's kind of been the guy for DRX so far in 2022. And that's been really, really good for them. A lot of people were talking about how he fell off a little bit last year, and he definitely didn't have a good 2020 when he was last on DRX, but yeah, he's not playing like that at all, in my opinion, in 2022. He has been really good, like all-pro caliber, really, really good. His game 2, I mean, those rockets, he's just a sniper, man. Like, he can hit anybody at any point on the map. He looked really good. Him and Beryl have great chemistry. This bot lane is for real. A lot of people are criticizing Zika's play. He had a great game 2 on the Corki, but a lot of people are blaming that on the Corki. And the fact that BDD, for some reason, just seems to have some sort of hesitancy to play Corki at all and to pick that champion. And they also apparently just don't want to ban it. It is clearly the best mid in the meta right now, and they gave it to Zika twice in a row. Zika absolutely destroys in game 2. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a problem there, but let's not take away from Zika. I think he's been better than maybe some people would like to give him credit for. Zika has changed his playstyle, I think, a lot from last year, where he was very jungle dependent, very Nisky, like I said earlier in the week. Wants to follow his jungle around, wants to make plays along with him. He's very much become a little bit of his own guy. He didn't have a great game 1 here going into the Azir, but his game 2 was much, much better. And his team fighting was really good late game. Kingen had a great game 1 here on the Akshan, kind of destroyed Kana on the Graves, although Kana played much better in game 2. And then Pioshik, while not being, like, overall, like, unbelievable, was a great facilitator here on the Jarvan. I think DRX just played well overall. As for Nongshim, they definitely have some issues. Ghost had a horrible series. He is my dud of the series. This is one of Ghost's worst series to date. His Caitlyn game in game 1 was really bad. He got completely outplayed by Deft. And then he was just nothing in game 2 on the Jhin. Peter tried his best to play better in game 2 on the Karma, but just wasn't going to happen. BDD had a really good game 1 on the Azir, his best game of the year by far, even though they couldn't pick up the win. But didn't really do much on the Victor in game 2, and then topside was just kind of non-factor. So, not a great loss here for Nongshim. I think overall, you go 0-2 this week, that kind of sucks, but It's not the worst 0-2 week that you could ever have. There are bright spots, but there also are definite low spots. Ghost was definitely a low spot this week. And while I think your bright spots of BDD and Peter in the series were fine, you're looking for more consistency. Again, Dread, somebody who's been inconsistent, you got to get more consistency out of him. He was great to start the year, but wasn't so great this week. And then Kana, you know, again, somebody who's kind of been inconsistent in the past, was really good in the first series of this week, not so much in the second series. That's kind of what I'm worried about with this Nongshim team, is just that you have no idea which one you're going to get from game to game. Really, ironically enough, the only player on this team that I think has been consistently good throughout all the games that he's played this year has been Peter, the sub coming in at support. So, you know, we'll see. We'll see with Nongshim. Hopefully they can turn it around. But for DRX, it's awesome to see them have confidence back. I don't know if it was a coach difference. I think it might have just been coincidental. But, you know, whatever the reason is, they seem to be firing on all cylinders now, and they look to be hitting some of the potential that we expected out of them coming into the year as a team that could potentially challenge one of the top 3 teams, or at this point, top 2 teams, for one of those spots. Jumping into the final day here of LCK Week 3 action, we had the series of the week, in my opinion, with DAMWON KIA taking on T1 in a very close 2-1 series win here for T1. A very, very fun couple of games. Game 1 is probably one of the games of the year so far. DAMWON's already been in one of those with Gen.G in Game 3 of their series, and then Game 1 of this one definitely lived up to that hype. DAMWON taking Game 1 off the back of Canyon just being unbelievable on this Jarvan, and a really good game from Bertle here on the Graves as well, and then decked him on the Caitlyn. Game 2 was a steamroll, though. T1 coming back with some fire. Not wanting, you know, T1 kind of threw away the game a little bit in Game 1, I would say. And then Game 2, they were not going to do that. Game 2 was just a domination. It was Owner on Lee Sin. It was Keria on that Thresh. I mean, Jesus. Gumayushi on the Aphelios. Faker on the Vex. They just took over this game. It was a big steamroll. And then Game 3, really, really close. Both sides played really well. I thought Bertle played well on the Aurelia, especially early game. Canyon on the Gwen played a little over-aggressive late game, getting caught against the Caitlyn, kind of throwing a fight a little bit, and then decked him at a good game on the Jhin, I thought, as well. But Faker, man, Faker's LeBlanc. You just can't beat Faker's LeBlanc in a Game 3. It's not going to happen. Faker is my player of the series here. He was phenomenal. If he's not your early MVP for the LCK in 2022, I don't know what you're doing. He has been the best player in the LCK so far this year, in my opinion. He has been phenomenal. He had that tank Rise game in Game 1 that wasn't really it, but it didn't really feel like it was his play. That was the problem. It was just the fact that he was doing 0 damage. And then he made up for it with the Vex and the LeBlanc games in Games 2 and 3. He looked unbelievable. He was easily the best player on the Rift again. Faker has been God mode in 2022. He's felt like, you know, old Faker again. He looked great. Keria was very close to getting player of the series here. That Thresh game in Game 2 was disgusting. Although he had a rough game in Game 1 on the Karma, he had a great game in Game 3 on the Karma. So I made up for that there. But Keria, great series. Gumayushi with a great series. Those 3 were really dominant for SKT. Or I'm sorry, for T1. I don't know. I'm losing my mind. I've got Faker on the brain. Faker on the brain. For DAMWON, honestly, no one played bad. Canyon was really freaking good this series overall, except for that one mistake that he made in Game 3 on the Gwen. I actually really like this draft for DAMWON in Game 3. With the Gwen jungle and then the Renekton mid. I think that could work out really well in a lot of scenarios. Unfortunately, it didn't in this game, although they did get a lead. It didn't in this one. Bertle played really well. He is clearly better than Hoya, and he's clearly the player in top lane that is going to give this team the ceiling that it needs to be good this year. He was really good in this series. Honestly, he outplayed Zeus. Zeus is actually... This is going to be a big shock. I don't do this often. I think it's the first time I've done this in the LCK this year. I did it in the LPL once, but... no one on DAMWON, even though they lost, gets the dud of the series. The dud of the series is going to go to Zeus on Team 1, because I do think he was the worst player in the series, and, you know, he struggled in lane a lot against Bertle, and, you know, that's going to happen. Sometimes you just get beaten lane. I do want to give him props for being able to play those team fights well, even when he was so far behind, but he was probably the worst player out of both teams. I just couldn't bring myself to give it to anybody on DAMWON. I don't think anybody on DAMWON played particularly poorly. Decked him Gale Forcing in that last fight because he thinks he can blow somebody up is a little bit of a question mark play, but he played so well before that it's really hard for me to say. I think Zeus really was the only player in the series that I think made plays that were worthy of the dud of the series, quote-unquote. So, unfortunately for him, he's going to get that, but he actually turned it around pretty well. After having some really rough laning phases, he turned it around in team fights. So, it's even hard for me to say that he played poorly. It's just, he probably played the worst of anybody here, but overall, just a really, really fun series to watch. I would highly recommend going back and rewatching Game 1 if you haven't seen it. It's a very, very fun game. But a very good 2-1 series win here. T1 is legit. This team just has playmakers from top to support, and anybody on this team can win you the game, which I think is something that is really, really dangerous to go up against. They may be the best team in the world right now. Finally, jumping into the last series of the week, we get to go from one of the more entertaining ones to one of just the more sad ones of the week. We had Hanwha Life taking on Liiv SANDBOX in a 2-0 win here for Hanwha Life. That was just, it was disgusting for parts of this. That I can absolutely say. Let's look at the positives. On Fleek looked really good for Hanwha in this series. He kind of took over the map on both sides. He out-jungled Krako, which I think is a pretty big achievement. Krako not having kind of the start to the split that you would have hoped after him being Rookie of the Year last year over Owner and over Guma. For him to not really start the year like this, I think is kind of disappointing. Not the worst series of all time from him. He definitely had players on his team who played worse, which we'll get to, but OnFleek looked really good. He is the player of the series here. He was probably the best player in both games, so definitely a well-deserved player of the series here. And then I thought Vista actually played really well in this series as well. Really good engages on the Leona and the Nautilus. I really like him on those tank engagey supports. He seems to really favor those, and when he gets them, he plays really well. Of course, he's going into one of the weaker bot lanes in the league in Ice and Kale, but, you know, looking good is still looking good. And I thought Vista looked really good in this series. They were the two big bright spots, I think, for Hanwha. I thought SamD was fine. His score looks phenomenal, like he played out of his mind, but Vista played really well. I think a big part of his score was just how well Vista played. SamD didn't play poorly, though. He still had a really, really good series here. And then I'm definitely concerned about Karis in the mid lane. He didn't have a great series here on the Syndra. He was definitely the better mid laner in the series, but that's definitely not saying a lot. He had a pretty decent start to the year, and he's kind of fallen off a little bit. Kind of drifted back down to the bottom. He is kind of meh overall, I'd say. And then Dudu is, we know, he's kind of bottom tier. As for Liiv, not a good series at all. Closer looked abysmal. I mean, this is maybe the worst series that we've seen out of a mid laner in the LCK this year. He looked awful. He's easily the dud of the series. He cannot play Corki. I don't know if that's him or what the reasoning is here. He was awful on Corki. He was missing rockets. He was getting caught out by Lee Sin over and over and over again. And then he went to Victor and absolutely got destroyed there as well. A horrible series here from Closer. He absolutely earned dud of the series, you know. He has had some bad games to start this year so far. I've heard a lot of people say that he's a top half mid laner, or he's one of the better mids in LCK. That is purely on hype. If you're saying that, you are following the hype train, because he's not showing that at all this year. He's had some games where he's been good, but I don't think he's even remotely close to that. He has games like this where he is, like, abysmally bad. So, not a good series from Closer. Not a good series from Krako either, like I said. And then Dove was kind of meh. The bot lane was kind of meh. Just kind of a boring series overall. Not too much happened. A good win for Hanwha. Liiv beating KT and then losing to Hanwha just kind of summed them up. But Hanwha taking the win here over Liiv. They're probably even, I would say, in strength for the most part. Both of these are bottom teams, so it's just hard to really say which one's better. But, you know, a good win here for Hanwha and a good series for OnFleek, who's kind of had a rough start to the year. And I know a lot of people have been calling for Willer, me included. But OnFleek kind of proving that he maybe deserves to get a little bit more time in this lineup in this series overall. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 3 overview, recaps, and analysis of all of the series. Up on the screen right now, on the left, you are seeing the current standings of the LCK from 1 to 10. And then on the right, my current power rankings and how they have changed from last week. Let's talk about the biggest risers and the biggest fallers, or just the risers and fallers in general. T1 is going to leapfrog Gen.G. I do have T1 now ranked as the #1 team. Gen.G taking the loss, but T1 overall just looking fantastic in general. KT and DRX are going to jump Nongshim. They had an 0-2 week. It wasn't a bad 0-2 week. They looked pretty good in their first series, but just that loss to DRX really bothered me a little bit. The consistency of that team definitely needs to come in a little bit more. Right now, I do like a lot of their players, but they need to prove that they can consistently beat teams like KT and DRX before I keep them at 4. Fredit BRION jumping up to 7 just because everybody else around them sucks. And then Kwangdong, the Freecs dropping down to 10th. At this point, I have no more excuses. They have some of the worst players in the LCK right now. They look like the 10th place team. My player of the week overall is going to be Deft on DRX. He was, in my opinion, the best player in the LCK this week. He had a great week, so Deft is my player of the week for Week 3. My dud of the week for Week 3 should be no surprise. It's going to be Elam on KDF. What a terrible week for LM. Maybe the worst week anybody's had in the world so far. Whatever the problem is there, they have to figure it out. But yeah, player of the week is Deft on DRX. And dud of the week is LM on the Kwangdong Freecs. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like. Let me know what your favorite series of the week was down in the comment section below. Who your players or duds of the week were. Who you liked this week, who you didn't like this week. Whatever you're interested in talking about. I love talking to you guys. You know that. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.